Memory transcription subject, Captain Sovlin, United Nations Fleet Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, December 3, 2136. Once the Arxer arrived at Silas, the humans' usage of FTL disruptors was strategic. The blocking effects were limited to upper orbit, and that allowed our fleet to travel further out. While the enemy was knocked to real speed, we were still zipping through subspace. The Terran warships were patient and dutiful in following the Greys, all the way from Qua. Stalking the reptilians across vast distances showcased the UN's predatory routes. Our shadow fleet emerged from FTL travel, just shy of the active disruptor zones. A gap of light years had been bridged in minutes, and our signatures were muddled by the Arxer's own wakes. Their fleet size was around 10,000 strong, and ours paled by comparison. But humanity had a few tricks on standby, and we hoped to make the child eaters suffer. From the sensor station, Onso and I parsed through the Greys' transmissions. A female reptile was taunting the humans by mocking their defensive line. This was wondrous confirmation that the Arxer were officially enemies of Earth. Silas had been expecting the attack, judging by their organized formation. However, the evac shuttles leaving the surface suggested their notice was limited. Sovlin, you're up. Tyler snapped his fingers together, which made me wince. I was unfamiliar with the painful-looking gesture. We're going for a pincer movement. Your task is to make sure that none of them escape. As a secondary job, watch for target locks and inbound fire. I snapped upright. Yes, sir. Onso, Captain Monahan was impressed with your thinking. I want you to brainstorm aggressive options, keep them ready and up to date. That'll be on top of managing the viewport. You got it, the yodel yipped. Harris and Romero, scan for any noteworthy signals from the surface. We need to have a full grasp of the situation as it progresses. Carlos frowned with disdain. Understood, sir. Great. Sounds fun, Samantha said dryly. With our tasks dished out, the sensor station was focused on the battlefield. The Terrans delegated duties with impeccable organization. There were dozens of moving parts on the bridge. Back in my days as captain, I'd never had such an efficient crew. Humans could always do more than us with less manpower. Their snap decisions were better than the Federation's months of planning. I remember what Tyler said about humans craving victory and domination. Maybe that reprehensible drive is what gives them the edge. But this wasn't the Kolshan fleet we dismantled with ease, nor was it the small raiding band that hit the cradle. This was every Arxer ship in 100 light-year radius, meant as a show of force. It was impressive enough to put my spines at full bristle. Seeing the monsters swarming Silas, I decided they'd been holding back against the Federation. A vendetta against any particular world would ensure its death. Why wouldn't the Dominion vanquish us all, if they had the decisive edge? Perhaps such a move would force us to unify further, or to flee. Chasing their food source off would crush hunting opportunities and render swaths of space preyless. The balance was hitting the Federation enough to keep us scared. They didn't want us to believe we could win, but they didn't encourage the idea that all was lost either. The sensor overlap didn't confuse them long enough. We're quite visible, Onso said. Look at the viewport, their rear flank is pivoting. Captain Monahan glowered at the screen. Sensors, how bad are the numbers? The UN garrison on Silas has about 1,500 ships, minus civies and transports, I replied. Then, there's 1,000 of us from the Shadow unit. Understood. We're making our move, people. Fire our weapons right behind the shield breakers. We only get one chance at a first strike. That was our hope, that the Greys didn't know about our shield developments. One hits were still unlikely, since Arxer ships had significant armor beneath ionic barriers. This trick wouldn't rattle them for as long as the Kolshans. However, even a demon would derive some confusion from shield outages. We'd have to see how many bullets their plating could absorb. Testing our enemy's defenses fell to the human gunships. The UN commenced its electromagnetic ambush with a literal bang, by hurling missiles into the Arxer's midst. Each detonation tossed out shrapnel, though most explosives were stopped en route. Crucially, the volleys blasted away the shields of nearby Greys. This proved the magnet bomb's effectiveness against all current ships, not just the Federation Armada. "Let's give them something to chew on," Monahan growled. The Terran crew members dipped into our new cache of bullets without hesitation. A relentless spray of our munitions rippled across the Arxer's rear flank. Kinetics punched holes in their steel plating, with other UN ships chipping in. Armor-piercing shells chewed through 80 centimeters of steel alloys like it was nothing. It seemed the Terrans had figured out the Arxer specifications, and tailored their weapons accordingly. Humans traded in firing speed for sheer power. From the results, their choice seemed justified. I was appalled that the Earth-born predators devised bullets which could puncture that deeply. Why had they crafted so many killing abominations for intraspecies wars? The Greys' evasive maneuvers were nigh instantaneous, as though rehearsed. Rather than bumbling into each other like the Federation, the Arxer communicated to avoid collisions. They turned sharply across our flight path, and were aided by a small turn radius. The enemy's mobility presented an added layer of difficulty for human targeting systems. Sensors confirm hits on about 400 hostiles. That's solid, but not as much as I hoped. It was then that the planetary defenses revealed themselves on Silius Moon. Lights decorated the lunar body, near its volcanic centers. Fearsome lasers pounded the Greys, concentrated strikes that melted the hardiest ships. The Tilfish's orbital constructions had been hastily reassembled, after most infrastructure was lost to the post-Earth raids. With each crackle from the moon, the Arxer weaved in different patterns. Their bombers initiated twists through the air, and changed orientations on a dime. A small posse swooped toward the lunar body, dodging attempted strikes with wild flying. I could see the glimmer in the humans' eyes, acknowledging a skilled foe. Even if they wouldn't vocalize it, the Terrans respected the Greys' quick adaptation. There's about 3,000 fighters, whipping around to face us. A few hundred going for the moon, and the rest, I muttered. Focused on the defenders and the planet, Onso finished. Tyler cleared his throat. How many enemy casualties? Visually, it doesn't look too convincing. A bit shy of 1,000, per the sensors. I chewed at my claws, and stared at the oncoming formation. I see a worrying pattern here, fighting every battle outnumbered. Samantha flashed her teeth. He wasn't quizzing your pattern recognition skills. Taking on the entire galaxy has its drawbacks, obviously. Right. I know you said not to let the fuckers escape, but unless you reasonably think you can win, it's us who need to pull back, I offered. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Without even meeting them head-on. 5 attempted target locks on us already. Do you think we can survive that? The Greys are gunning for the Terran-made ships, not the Federation retrofits. The blonde human narrowed his icy eyes, and jogged over to the captain. Monahan was on the comms with the rest of our fleet, plotting our overarching strategy. The Arxer ships sailed closer, and I could make out their signature twin railguns. That 1-2 punch could hammer a target on both sides, ensuring serious damage. It also made evasion a steep task, at the cost of splitting power output. On the opposite side of the battlefield, I could see the Arxer firing a hefty barrage at the UN defenders. Several Greys feinted toward the planet, hoping that the humans would be reckless to prevent orbital strikes. However, our goal was to mitigate the damage rather than stop it altogether. The Terrans had no intent of throwing a key battle for the Tilfish inhabitants. It was a small sacrifice to halt the Arxer's aggression, in the scope of the galaxy. Humans were logical when it came down to their survival, and they hadn't forgotten the Tilfish's part in the Crocodile Coalition. That was why I expected Captain Monahan to second my assessment, pulling back before we could sustain heavy damage. Reverse thrust at full power. We're going to clear our FTL disruptor zone, Monahan barked. Drones will run interference on the Arxer's targeting systems. I could see the automated craft gunning forward and snaking through the enemy ranks to confuse their systems. That move hindered the Greys from lining us up whenever the drones obstructed their shot. The Arxer must be guffawing at our cowardice as we receded through the night sky. Smaller Terran ships were pushing a considerable fraction of light speed, leading the retreat. The other human wing, defending Silas, spit out a few shots before surrendering their posts. They dove into the planet's atmosphere for cover and conceded orbital range to the Arxer. The UN was sacrificing the very target they sought to protect altogether. This concession spit in the face of military doctrine. Then again, the defender's disadvantage was linked to being tied down. The Terrans' only objective was to best the Greys in combat, and I suppose that meant regrouping elsewhere. Arxer bombers were mopping up the planetary defenses on Silas Moon, with no friendlies assigned to its defense. The lunar bases succumbed after chucking a few bombs. It was a last-ditch attempt to take some hostiles with them. Seemingly, humanity was losing a battle for the first time since Earth. We're out of range of the FTL disruptors. I yelled to Tyler, in a breathy voice. M might be able to stall enough to jump out. We're not jumping anywhere. Captain Monahan snapped her chin toward my shouting, with dilated eyes the size of moons. Our goal is to cover the rear contingent as they warp out. Officer Cardona skipped back to his post. Yep. Change of plans, Gojid. You see any ship target locking the ships in warp prep, you let me know. Yes, sir. May I ask why we're not all warping out? I questioned. Skipper says those ships are going to warp back here in staggered intervals. Something about FTL keeping the enemy paranoid. The rest of us, our goal is to maintain a stalemate and keep the Greys' attention. A third of our Shadow fleet, which was already lacking in numbers, had retreated well behind our main formation. I could see UN breakaways spooling up their drives on sensors and plotting warp paths in a stationary limbo. The process generated a gravitational disturbance that was tough to miss. Guarding ships that were out of the fray seemed like a foolish task. Perhaps my prior assessment, that humans were the most advanced military in the galaxy, perhaps it was premature. The Arxer had swatted away the drones, though a few automatons were still harassing them. Unlike the Kolshians, the Greys excelled at manual targeting. The foul predator's reflexes took over and defied all predictability from Terran algorithms. There was no rhyme or reason, just their impulse at the current moment. Spontaneity couldn't be simulated or projected, not even by a human contraption. Despite the daunting odds, it was up to our manned craft to hold them back. Terran warships tested the waters with a few plasma beams, though my particular craft held our fire. 2 behemoth carriers opened their bellies and spawned a number of UN fighters. Without enemy shielding, perhaps their nimble dogfighting stood a chance. Onso flicked his ears at Tyler. Do the fighters have plasma weaponry? A few do. The ones molded from patrol boats have small plasma rounds, the human answered. Overall, we prefer kinetics. Why? We should blind the bastards up close. Throw it right in their face, viewport. That could be a good supplementary play. I'll pass that along, buddy. The Arxer had extreme light sensitivity, due to their forward-facing pupils. For some reason, humans were not as susceptible to these tactics. Noah's greeting party made them aware of the idea, though. Shining a bunch of plasma flares right at the Greys might work in a space setting too. The initial foray didn't appear to be going well. Momentum had swung in the enemy's favor. The Terran's smaller craft weren't faring well against the heavyweights. Dominion bombers powered up coaxial railguns, and took out fighters by the dozen. Even without shielding, tiny kinetic-based ships weren't getting the job done. Onso's tip must have been relayed to the charging fighters, because a few human ships went for a pass. These must be the boats with plasma munitions. Their turrets unloaded at much shorter ranges, and with less power than a railgun. However, their firing speed allowed them to spew energy bolts one after the other. The Greys relied on optical reflexes, but in this instance, that was an exploitable weakness. Blinding plasma streaked across their field of vision and left their ships heedless to incoming munitions. The Arxer were forced to backpedal, dampening their breakneck pace. That was fortuitous for us, since our stalled ship still needed time to achieve warp. Monahan signaled to weapons and navigations. Move forward. I want us in missile range, yesterday. Fire the railgun while we're advancing. The lights dimmed on the bridge, as our railgun projected molten munitions toward the Arxer. The carnivores were disoriented, and unable to enact evasive maneuvers. Our warship's beam sundered one enemy with its scorching power, and left it as a lifeless husk. Fittingly, its crew was doomed to slow suffocation. Others in our fleet surged forward, using aggression to keep the enemy at bay. Fighter allies capitalized on the blinding too, dispensing their kinetic hull. This was our primary stand, buying precious seconds for the Terran's elusive plan. If we could whittle the enemy down to a more manageable ratio, that was a bonus. It was possible we'd lose our own hides, should we falter. It was that very sentiment that the primates greeted with impassivity. The aliens on the bridge found our eyes drawn to certain humans. There was something new in the predator's gaze. It looked like acceptance, because they knew high casualties were probable. How could they be so calm? There's more in their war brain than the dominating urge, the call of predator instincts. Self-sacrifice for a comrade comes naturally to humans. The Arxer attempted to shirk our advance, but we adjusted our vectors to match them. Our opponents had shaken off the blinding tactic and refocused on UN ships that were warping out. My orders plainly stated that their destruction could not happen. I highlighted several vessels on my sensors, ones who were trying to establish target locks on the warp group. Tyler took the cue, without any explanation. Here's our targets. Bury them. Each UN warship picked their mark, and we began swapping missiles with the Greys. One enemy projectile was arcing a bit too close for comfort, but we intercepted it first. Our own success rate was also paltry, with the Dominion bombers picking off numerous warheads. At least it distracted them from the vulnerable warpers, for a moment. I glanced at my sensor's readout, feeling my stomach flip from nerves. We couldn't protect sitting targets much longer. The Arxer's numbers were far more than we could hope to restrain. Hostile bombers, fresh from demolishing Scylla's moon, were joining up as reinforcements. Our last trick had been executed, and now, this was a straight-up brawl. In hindsight, the Terrans should have withheld a sect of the Shadow Fleet from the beginning. But the main ambush was supposed to be deadlier, and we expected to scatter the enemy. I figured the reason our ship lingered was because the brass realized every craft couldn't escape. Someone had to guard the jump point. Captain Monahan stomped her foot empathically. Do not let the Arxer get anything off at the rear flank. They're aiming for us too. There's a target lock on our ship. I called out. Damn it. If we try to evade, they get an opening. Shoot them first. A weapons tech coughed. There's no time to calibrate. Eyeball it. Give me a Hail Mary. The Terrans identified the ship target locking us, and swiveled the railgun in its direction. With the vastness of space, it normally took several seconds to align the sights and set the coordinates. The technician squinted through one binocular eye, as though that would enhance her predator instincts. She jerked the railgun on target, and scrolled across the viewport quickly. I knew the task was impossible, given that humans didn't possess omnipotence. Picking something that looked about right wasn't enough, it had to be perfect. Dozens of factors went into a successful kill. Bungling a single one, such as our ship's vector, their distance, and their future location, would cause a hopeless miss. Not even an apex predator could eyeball that in a second. Carlos? Sam? I'm glad I got to know you, I croaked. Samantha sighed. There's no other racist war criminal I'd rather spend my last moments with. Carlos chuckled to himself. Likewise. We saved each other's ass a few times, huh? Yeah. Mostly me saving you, I snorted. The plasma railgun had released its Hail Mary, but I couldn't bring myself to watch. Why spend my last seconds dwelling on our failure? Perhaps I understood the acceptance in the Predator's eyes earlier. Everyone aboard this vessel knew we could wind up dead, and we endured that risk. Monahan could have dodged our target lock, yet the captain put the mission first. I didn't understand why the Terrans had their eyes glued to the viewport. That impossible hope persisted in them to the last, unwilling to acknowledge reality. But there was no sense in crushing their childish optimism in their last moments. The loss of my friends, of Marcel's packmate, and even primitive Onso weighed on my heart. The last emotion I felt was grief. Claps, whoops, and cheers sounded across the bridge, which startled me half to death. Onso focused the viewport on a shattered vessel, which must have taken a hit to the drive column. I glanced at my sensors, and saw the target lock was gone. That was not possible, even for a Predator. The odds were astronomical. There was no way any living being could land such a shot. We're alive. We fucking made it. Tyler hollered. I exhaled a shaky breath. Humanity had sustained a few losses, but our warship wasn't among them. Miraculously, our stall tactics had delayed the enemy for enough time. Dots from the rear contingent vanished off sensors, one after the other. Those UN ships warped out in a hurry, and I had no clue where they'd gone. The humans succeeded in getting a few players out of the system. Now, we were stuck here, and we had to find a way to survive. Memory transcription subject, Slanik, Venlo Space Corps. Date, standardized human time, December 3, 2136. The bombs began falling within minutes. From our vantage point, the explosions were mere smoky blips on the horizon. Orange pops illuminated the night like wildfire, but I knew they were destructive strikes against Scylla's supercontinent. How had the Arxer gotten within orbital range so quickly? Why had the human defenders been unable to slow them down at all? Terror chilled my fur, as I guessed the UN was no longer challenging the front flank at all. The streaks in the sky were further out now, judging by their diminished luminance. There was no indication on our radio chatter that we'd sustained catastrophic losses. I believed in my Predators too strongly to accept that the defensive line was wiped out upon arrival. That left me to believe the Terrans chose a strategic retreat. I think the blue helmets above abandoned us. Marcel's hazel eyes were bulging, as he held Vernt against his chest. Burla, do you know the quickest way to the spaceport? The Tillfish general scuttled forward anxiously. What? You're not de-defending the planet at all? So you are just leaving us to die? General, honestly, I don't think Scylla is our concern. The UN wants the best fighting chances. It seems they're taking up a position elsewhere. There's billions of civilians. Kids. There were kids on Earth too. Marcel snapped, before drawing a shaky breath. I'm sorry. I know the Tillfish populace had nothing to do with it, but I get us not wanting to lose more human lives. Honestly, my friend's anger made perfect sense. The emotional distress was visible in his eyes. It was unreasonable to expect the humans to fight tooth and nail for an enemy, even if they'd done so on the cradle. The difference was that the Gogeta Union was stopped before they could deal any damage to Earth. Even I harbored a grudge against the Tillfish for the heartache the raid caused. General Burla hadn't seen human cities buried in rubble and predators burned half alive. She hadn't watched massive soldiers drop to their knees, sobbing brokenly. After the vengefulness that surfaced in the following week, I would have pegged the Terrans to glass this planet themselves. It was merciful that cooler heads found reasons to accept a surrender at all. Please, Marcel. I know you, and all of humanity, have suffered. But how can you let children die? Burla pleaded. The human covered Vern's antennae carefully. Funny. I remember wondering aloud how the Federation could slaughter us, saying those exact words to Slanik. Just like you are implying about us. If it was my call, Burla, I would save as many lives as I could. Then save some of us. However many you can. I'm saving you and Vernt. Marcel placed the Tillfish child atop his helmet, adding another adornment to his cranium. Vernt had been quiet ever since the bombs started falling. I doubted he understood the gravity of the situation, but at the least, the kid recognized our demeanor shifts. The young insectoid's eyes lit up briefly from his new perch. So high. Hama is tall as a mountain, Vernt giggled. My best friend quickened his steps. We're about to be much higher. Because Burla is taking us to the spaceport, right? And we're gonna evacuate? The Tillfish general cleared her throat. Yes. Follow me. Burla scuttled through a nearby alley, and my human followed. I hustled after them, though my legs weren't as durable as theirs. Marcel glanced back at me briefly, and I gave him the most adorable head tilt I could muster. His response was an exasperated sigh, before barking to pick up the pace. If my groveling couldn't melt his frigid act, our relationship was in dire straits. The human had never shut me out since the beginning of the exchange program. Now, out of the blue, we weren't on speaking terms. It was unfair to push me away, especially when our lives were in imminent peril. Hell, it was almost manipulative. All I did was advise Burla to take Vernt to a medical professional, like any reasonable person. To make a hopeless situation worse, a bone-chilling bark reverberated behind me. I knew without looking that the guttural cry belonged to Dino. The slobbery dog had a habit of waiting outside my tent and seeking me out during its downtime. The humans allowed it to roam the base wherever it pleased, without a care for who it bothered. Of course, its handler couldn't have collected it for the evacuation. It had to be breathing down my haunches during a raid. Burla screamed. Predator. Run. No, it's okay. Dino, sit. Marcel bellowed. The filthy mutt whined and lowered its rump to the ground. Its sable tail thrashed the pavement, while its brown eyes studied me. The pink tongue lolling out of its mouth was covered in saliva flecks. It was a relief the dog obeyed, with how it had been barreling down on our position. The demon could sprint faster than a human, while sharing their tirelessness. Dogs are persistence predators too, aren't they? I realized. That's why the humans favor them, and once use them for hunting. Slanik, the dog's with you. The human's low voice made it clear there was no room for argument. Unless you want to be difficult? I drew a shuddering breath. I'm not the one being difficult. Dino seems nicer than you right now. That last statement wasn't quite heartfelt, but I wouldn't give Marcel the satisfaction of seeing my discomfort. The dog bounded along at my side, and I tried not to focus on its monstrous presence. Burla seemed wary of the beast, though Vernt was testing out the word dog with giddiness. The longer I observed the Tillfish child, the more I thought something wasn't right with his wiring. Marcel had his service weapon drawn, and eyed Tillfish civilians we passed warily. The human was aware of our present vulnerability to a rebel attack. This city's populace resented us more after we gassed and deafened them at their initial protest. My friend was the one who ordered the curfew, so they might have particular disdain for him. Burla steered us past factories and storage units, keeping her own eyes peeled. The Tillfish General was avoiding crowded areas where possible. I hoped that wasn't at the expense of time. Arxer landing parties crested above us and skirted the occasional anti-air fire. Humans weren't putting much pressure on them, with their focus on evacuation. Arxer units are arriving in most major cities. If your location hasn't been bombed yet, that means hostiles inbound, a gravelly voice said over the radio. All evacuation shuttles need to be off the ground in 10 minutes. Marcel's eyes darted around. Shit! Are we going to make it? With time to spare, Burla answered. Cut through the incubator facility here, and it'll just take a few minutes. Saves a lot of time not to go around. Good. I'm sure glad you're here. The Tillfish General didn't return the compliment. She ducked into a circular building, which took up an entire block with its daunting size. Vern leaned over Marcel's forehead and started playing with his helmet straps. The Terran scolded his passenger, ordering the little one to remain still. The kid fell limp with a sad look. Tillfish geneticists protested the intrusion, though they quickly retreated when Marcel's gun pivoted. I knew this place was sacred to an egg-laying species. It was where they raised their offspring to hatching day. Teams of medical professionals were dedicated to maintaining the ideal conditions and saving any younglings that hatched early. The Harchen and the crocodile were protective of such institutions too. It was rare any egg-laying race trusted a mammalian species to wander their fragile safehouses. All it took was one clueless sapient messing with an egg to burst its bubble. I can only imagine how these tillfish feel about a predator soldier taking a shortcut through here. Not to mention Dino mucking up the place. We strode past an observation room, partitioned off down the hallway. Marcel studied the X-rays monitoring each egg's health, and his facial features softened. He took a second to peer at the orange pods through the incubator glass. Labels were affixed to every specimen, identifying the parents. The human slowly digested that those globs were someone's kid. Burla cleared her throat. There's no time to snack. Let's go. You think I wanted to eat them? Marcel hissed. I was just curious. I've never seen anything like this. Sorry. Your expression turned very weird. I was imagining Vernt as an egg, and wondering how many you, lay at once. 20 or 30. Why your eyes went very wide. Is that, normal? I'm just surprised. That is a lot. Where are Vernt's siblings? Thrown away, the child cheered. I'm the chosen one. Disbelief flashed in Marcel's hazel eyes, after absorbing Vernt's decree. The Tillfish General flicked her antennae, and the human took the hint to move along. We turned into a lengthy walkway, chasing off more staffers. My lungs ached from keeping up with the Terran. Dino's nightmarish presence wasn't helping me breathe either. Burla sighed. Maybe I shouldn't have told Vernt the honest answer. You, throw your eggs away? Marcel asked, in a voice that crept an octave higher. I don't know how to respond to that. It's not like that, please, let me explain. These days, most tillfish decide how many children they want to have. 20 is a lot, like you said, and all at once, it's a tall order. Yeah, I see why parents wouldn't sign up for that. So you decided you wanted one kid, Burla? Vernt is the lucky one, like he said. You see, we used to hold an average of about 5 eggs kept. Ever since first contact, more people wanted 1 or 2, like the other races. Ha! It must have looked like other species had it easy, compared to you. Indeed. With technology nowadays, we can pick which eggs are most viable early on. Doctors run tests to avoid defects, and they can find positive traits too. Vernt was predisposed to intelligence, so I chose him. Burla led us past a spacious laboratory and explained its features quickly. Microscopes and testing machines lined the room, along with bins of tillfish eggs. This gave Marcel a visual of how large a litter was. Honestly, each jar looked like one of those gumball machines on Earth. I doubted humans could handle that many offspring. I couldn't imagine juggling 20 newborns at once. The Venlil devoted ample time rearing a single child. It wouldn't surprise me if the tillfish had to abandon their weakest young in the past. How else would the herd survive, without sacrifices? That was a lot of mouths to feed, prior to the post-scarcity era. It made it somewhat understandable why they became omnivores. Exit out the rear door up ahead, and cross the street. We almost made it to the spaceport. Burla clicked. Verndt bounced on the Terran's helmet. Awesome. To space with Humma. The tour had been a welcome distraction from the Arxur raid transpiring outdoors. Inside this stone building, I couldn't see the explosions peppering the skyline. But it was time to endure the final chaos and face our grisly reality once more. Marcel slunk forward with caution, leading the way to the exit. The paranoid predator still hadn't lowered his gun. Dino's ears perked up, and the beast projected a fearsome bark. The sudden noise, thunderous and throaty, nearly made me tip over from fright. The dog's hackle fur rose, and it began outright growling. I knew it all along. The vile predator was going to attack at random. I could feel my insides twisting, and my legs turning into paste. What is it, boy? Marcel paused at the door, and turned his head toward the canine. You hear something? It's our ravenous. It's gone feral. I screamed. My best friend bit his lip with displeasure, holding back some snide remark. Dino cemented its insanity further, belting out a series of harsh barks. Marcel inched several steps back, and held up a hand for us to wait. Because of a dog's hunger fit, my human was wasting precious time. I'm so sick of this non-sapient thing. It's dangerous, and I'm tired of the Terrans treating it like a pack member. A dangerous thought crept into my mind, and I unclipped my sidearm. This was the perfect chance to put Dino down. It wouldn't win me any favor with Marcel, but I was already out of his good graces. I coaxed my weapon up, and lined the sights on the animal. Its outburst gave me a suitable reason to be rid of it, at last. Marcel was oblivious to my extermination plot. His gaze was following Dino's stare. Shadowy shapes moved up to the door, and I jerked my gun away from the dog. Its growling was drowned out by the sound of shattering glass. Gunfire tore through the door's opaque frame, and lanced into the room. The human sprinted back toward our position, holding on to Verndt. Arxur hostiles. Marcel roared, terrifying Burla with his pitch. Is there another exit? The gray shouldered through the broken frame, and took aim at anything that moved. This was a logical first stop on the raid, with an easy stash of eggs here, thousands of them. Unlike the ones helping in New York, these demons were here to wreak havoc. The fact that Marcel felt the need to attack hostiles after Arxur, it was an insult to the Venlil's suffering. I forced my claw onto the trigger. My bullet sailed in the direction of the greys, but it didn't connect with the monsters. Marcel's hand was on my shoulder in an instant. The human pushed me to the ground, and slid behind a chair. It warmed my petrified heart to know that he'd still protect me in a battle. Dino charged at the monstrosities, and sank its fangs into an Arxur thigh. The dog brought down the gray with ease, like it was wrangling a prey creature. One Dominion soldier attempted to rescue its colleague. However, the hasty shot missed the dog, and went through the downed Arxur's stomach instead. The ugly mutt's charge had bought us time to regroup. If it hadn't detected the Arxur raiders, we would have been gunned down the second we stepped outside. Those vicious growls might have been a warning for us, just like Marcel assumed. I felt a tinge of regret for almost shooting it, though I shoved that emotion down. Burla. Marcel waved a hand in front of the general's face. Is there another exit? The female tillfish swallowed. T, there's an emergency exit, T to our left. Good. We move on 3. The human whistled to the dog, before popping shots off at the Arxer to cover its retreat. The animal came running at Marcel's summons, and returned itself to my side. Dino was fresh out of close combat, sniffing my paw a bit too eagerly with its predatory snout. I ignored the beast, but I tried to suppress my innate resentment. The Greys dusted themselves off from the dog attack, and peppered our cover with bullets. The foam upholstery wasn't built to survive an assault, it was riddled with holes in seconds. This wasn't an actual shelter that could ward off the Arxer savages. Marcel gave the signal to move, and I indulged my instinct to run with gratitude. The human dispensed a few hasty shots, giving us time to move. He lingered behind, all the while drawing the Arxer's attention. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw one monster buckle to the floor. My legs bolted for a side corridor, while my tail found itself drooping again. Burla and I pressed up against the wall, with Dino skipping at our heels. It brought immeasurable relief to be huddled at a more secure location. However, that sensation was fleeting when I remembered the human. My eyes searched for him, and found his lanky form still crouched behind the chair. Marcel had taken out another Grey, but their raiding party could afford a few losses. The human was surrounded, and would be mowed down the instant he stood up. His hands cupped Vert against his chest, gentle affection in his gaze. An unimaginable sense of loss gripped my heart when I realized the primate was pinned down. The thought of anything hurting Mark makes me weak at the knees. He's someone I love being around, and who I trust above all others. My human deserves to make it out of here, I muttered to myself. My shaking paws became still, as that motivation spurred a return to my training. I poked my head out from behind the wall, and shouted for the Arxer's attention. Marcel widened his eyes, gesturing at his throat. There was no chance I'd let such a wonderful soul sacrifice himself for my sake. I did my best imitation of an injured squeal, fully earning the Grey's attention. The human stuffed Vert in his helmet, and bolted toward my position. Barely aiming, I lobbed several shots at the Arxer. My newfound bravery fizzled out, as dozens of gluttonous pupils trained on me. The enemy guns swiveled away from their fellow predator, and landed on the weak Venlil. Pain lanced through my shoulder, like the muscles were torn from my arm. I fell backward as white-hot agony overwhelmed my senses. The Arxer nailed me with a bullet. Did that mean I was dying? My panic intensified when sharp teeth pressed against my scruff. Dino dragged me behind the wall, and planted a slobbery lick on my mouth. I screeched in disgust. Away. Gee, gross. Marcel slid across the floor. Slanuk? No, no, are you okay? Answer me. Leave. Please, just go. You have to get to your shuttle. The vegetarian tapped a wristband, which offered a readout of Terran numbers. It was illegible to my eyes, but I sensed that the information wasn't a positive sight. A sad smile crossed his scarred face, and he breathed a half-hearted sigh. He deferred my firearm to Burla, before kneeling beside me. The countdown is at 0. Our evacuation ships already left. Marcel hoisted me to my feet, and draped my good arm around his neck. We're stuck here. Utter defeat crushed my spirit, realizing we were stranded on a forsaken world. So this was how the unlucky soldiers felt on the cradle, fighting a hopeless fight. There was no escape from Silas, and no humans coming back for us. With the Arxer swarming every settlement, our deaths were all but a guarantee.